This is Empowered Human Academy. Welcome home.
The question is, do you want to fight hard all day long, 24 hours a day to continue to have what you've got? Or do you want to acquiesce to your truth and let it flow? That, to me, I'm not saying it's easy. It's terrifying, but it's better.
This is about love. This is about light. This is about the idea that you have everything you will ever need.
And this life of yours, this is where you grow, you expand, and you remember who you really are.
I'm Abe.
I'm Isaac.
In Empowered Human Academy, we join with humans of all kinds to feel the inspiration that can only come with empowered living.
The stories you hear today are unique, but the energy you hear today belongs to you too. So, with hearts wide open, let's begin.
Jim, hello. Welcome to this conversation that we have been really looking forward to for a long time, ever since we met a couple of years ago. Thank you so much for chatting with us and for being here. How's it going?
It's going great. It's a thrill to be here. Thanks for having me. Look forward to talking.
Yeah, absolutely. We open the way we always do with a question of core identity and essence. So when you're coming home to just yourself and it's just you and you've got all the space in the world to be yourself and you're not being anything to anyone, and you're not introducing yourself a certain way and you're not occupying a role, who are you? What words of identity feel like they really fit?
For myself, I would say I'm an explorer. I'm inherently curious. So if I am, to your point, left unattended, I'm probably exploring something. So, looking into something, trying something out, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm constantly curious.
That makes me incredibly happy. Left unattended. I think if I could go back and ask the question a different way, I think that's probably where I would begin. Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's go with that. Like, left unattended, what are you exploring right now? We don't normally jump to specific subject matter, but I'm curious. What are you curious about right now? What are you exploring right now?
To be totally honest, I'm researching early 1930s motorcycles to potentially overhaul to race in this thing called the Race of Gentlemen that just happened last weekend, and we're probably going to go back next year and do that. So it's kind of a family thing, but that's current. I know nothing about them. I know something about motorcycles to a degree, but the real old school stuff I'm less familiar with.
Sure. So I'm curious about this. Like, you're putting time and resource and planning around something that you don't know very much about. What does your curiosity look like over time? Do you find yourself going into areas where you have like a thread of a connection or a massive connection or no connection whatsoever? Like, what brand of, like, how new does your curiosity prefer, if that makes sense? That was a terribly phrased question, but you see what I mean.
I totally get it. I feel like I've joked in the past that there's present Jim and future Jim. And present Jim has a lot of opinions about future Jim and puts future Jim up for a variety of things that future Jim doesn't really understand. And so I think the dynamic is because of the curiosity, I get myself into things and end up pushing myself in places that I wouldn't otherwise be. And, as an only child and an introvert and all those other things, I think that has been sort of the fuel for what's gotten me, some modicum of success and at least well-roundedness.
Sure.
So
yeah,
that seems to be the dynamic.
That makes sense. Okay. So fuel applied over time tells me that you've got something sustainable going, which tells me that when future Jim arrives in the present, it's something that you like the relationship going backwards is also
future
positive.
Jim is typically pissed off at present Jim because future Jim is having to deal with all the stuff that present Jim, thought was a great idea. So, giving a speech in front of 1,000 people or getting on a motorcycle to go race down a beach. I can tell you that future Jim will be cursing present Jim when that motorcycle is rumbling to life, with some redneck next to me ready to race me. So that'll be, I'll report back in a year on that, but that tends to be the dynamic.
Has there been a moment where you're like, oh, this future Jim, which is my present Jim, was happy about your past Jim? And
he's always happy. Once we get through it, we're all good. But in that moment, at the inflection point, there's a little cursing going on, right before you walk on stage or right before you, whatever.
Totally.
Recently, someone proposed a distinction between suffering and pain to me, and I've been thinking about that recently. Is that apropos here? Like the cursing at the moment of execution? Like is that just kind of rote at this point? Like it's coming, and so you're just going to endure it and get to the good stuff, or like what is that relationship like?
I think if I were to interpret that a little bit, I would guess that suffering is maybe less purposeful and pain maybe has some purpose. I wouldn't want to presume, but I'm interpreting it that way. And so I would say that, taking a risk, the gap that you jump, the fear that you get through is the growth that's happening. And that's to me always has to be happening. And so that to me would be how I would interpret that. I will experience some pain, but I will use some strength to get through it. And there will be some goodness on the other side of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is the satisfaction of curiosity the point? Is the growth the point? Is it all the point? Is none of that the point?
I think growth is the point. I think it's a constant hunger for growth. When I was a liberal arts major, I was constantly told that liberal arts people do better in business than MBAs and whatnot because they're better at handling complex ideas and blah blah blah. But I think there's something there. I think pushing yourself through in order to grow, reading Beowulf or whatever at the time was the point. But, interviewing an engineer who's converting a gasoline engine van to be natural gas operating and documenting that system was kind of what I had to push through in my early career. And it was those things where I had no idea what I was doing that always, got you through.
You have such a fascinating kind of story and career path that we have found really intriguing. And we spent some time a couple months ago in Chicago or recently. I want to just kind of touch on how creativity has kind of influenced your career and what you've created and how that has affected like your knowing about what wants to happen next for you. If that has been the case, but I'm just curious about how creativity has played a role in what you've created.
It's a really great question. It harkens me back to an earlier point in my career where there was a company called March 1st, which was a mashup of another Chicago company called Whitman Hart and an acquisition called US Web CKS and blah, blah, blah. If you look it up, it's one of the biggest dot bomb failures of the early 2000s. It went from whatever X 100 million to 10 billion overnight and then down to zero in 18 months. And so what was interesting about it was they brought together a technology company, a business strategy company, and creative. And so I sat at the nexus of creative and technology, and my job was to kind of coherently project manage creative. And so I've always seen myself as not necessarily the creative, but the defender of creativity and creating the spaces for it to happen logically. And at the time, and I still think this is the case, it was new then, was user-centered design is a logical process for making, let's just say, human-driven decisions. And that, again, to me was very interesting. So I would say that's essentially how I've kind of driven my career since those early days, where those were big stakes, big companies trying to figure things out during the pets.com and other ridiculous things that were happening then.
Sure.
But as that company augured itself into the ground in a colossal way, the only things that were working were user-centered design projects. And that's kind of what spawned our idea to kind of, hey, let's step out of this mess and start our own company and base it in user-centered design. And so that created some success for another 15 plus years.
Whoa.
You said something that like both of our ears immediately perked up on, and then we both wrote notes simultaneously about it. So I want to talk about it. You said creativity happening logically. Can you elaborate on that idea?
Yeah, I think in a vacuum, engineers or accountants will say that they're logical and not creative, and let's say artists closer to our world designers will say that they are creative, and neither is true. Everybody's creative. Humanness you're surviving every day. Getting out of bed is an act of creativity, and so and courage. And so I think that being creative logically is simply a way of understanding that there are no yeses or nos. There are trade-offs. There are pros and cons. And I would say the same for account management or project management too. I'm not going to tell a client that they can or can't do something. I'm just going to tell them the implications of their decision. And that's really how you navigate, I think, creativity. So if we're designing wireframes or a design system, or if we're designing middleware to connect back end to a front end, it's all a matter of creativity and trade-offs.
The logical application of that, like how is there a piece there also? Like, I might be overreading into this, but I'm curious about. Well, actually, no. Let's take this way. So one of if I understand this correctly, one of the companies that you run right now is around user-centered design. Is that accurate?
Or
is that a past chapter?
Yep.
Okay,
no, that's true.
Okay, so noob question for somebody not in that specific field. How does one handle creative work when there are lots of non-creative requirements in play?
I guess I wouldn't frame it as creative. I would frame it as
beautiful.
Yeah, I would frame it as user-centered or human-centered, and a logic system of making choices through that process. So there is a blend of design, traditionally designy looking things like icons and photography and page layouts, and there's but equally a system of coding, front end, middleware, and back end, and that also is creative. So navigating, again, it's just a series of trade-offs. If you want whatever the cliche is, rounded corners and drop shadows, you're going to have to put more work into it to achieve that, and if you're, so our big thing is, how do you create a design system first and then apply that design system in a way that honors its overall intentions, so that you get the benefits of intuitive understanding. When a user bumps into something new, they understand it because it's a pattern that they've seen. So we kind of look at things that way. So we, if we're talking to a client, at some points we'll call ourselves a technology company, because that's what they need to hear, because that's how they'll respect us appropriately. And if we're working with a marketer, we'll call ourselves creative, because that's what they need to hear. And so I've always seen myself as the kind of mediator. It's almost like a bad marriage. We're mediating the differences between design and technology, always.
I'm going to say this point. This is not a question, then I'll ask a question, but I'm always curious about what people need to hear in order to open the doors for possibility or for collaboration. And it's interesting that you say that, because I feel like in my past that has been hard to kind of admit that there needs to be said something that another person or the society would be able to hear. And I'm curious your relationship to that, because like for me, it's been kind of tumultuous internally, because I'm like, well, I want to be authentic. And also I know that if I know what we're doing internally, but it needs to be digestible for someone else in order for them to even be curious about what we're doing. So I'm curious, like your relationship to that just made my ears perk, because I'm like, that is such a tug of war that I always internally kind of deal with. But it's so important, because in order to move forward, in my opinion, like people need to understand what you're doing. But I don't know if this has to do with even like the human design work that you do, but kind of elaborate for me in your mind, what's going on in your mind about that.
I think you have to meet people where they are first, which simply means acknowledging, not to be corny about it, but I see you. I see who you are and what you do, and that you are important and that you exist. And for, let's just say arbitrarily, for a CMO, that means that you understand marketing campaigns and MarTech systems that have to tie into back-end systems, and you understand media buys and all that hoo-ha. And but the truth of the matter is, if we're building that into a broader enterprise level system, it's technology. But that person will never want to hear that we are technologists. They will dismiss us out of hand and say, "You're not right for me." So we, it's To be frank, I forget what it's signal shifting, right? It's you change your language to meet the person that you're talking with. And this is not nearly as dramatic as how it's used in society, but it's a form of it.
Totally. Sure. Code switching. Yes.
Code switching. Sorry.
No. That's right on. I'm resonating with this personally because there's a chapter when I was like working really hard at resolving my own identity. And then I felt if I ever offered a partial identity, I was like losing a sense of myself. So I have some personal interest in this here. And I'm curious as to any parallels. I'm not going to assume that any exist, but I'm curious about if any exist or if any contrast exists between this kind of model and how you handle your own personal identity, how you offer yourself to the world, not just your businesses. Can you talk me through some of that?
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying because it's hard to not be your whole self, especially the more you know yourself, and maybe in some cases hold parts back because somebody's not ready for that yet, or
sure.
can't hear it, or will be distracted, or whatever the case may be. I think this is kind of silly, but there's a point in the autobiography for Keith Richards, which I will tell you right off the bat, I haven't read, but I've heard stories about. And one of my favorite stories is and you hear this from famous people pretty regularly, if they provide this kind of realization, he stopped fighting with people for what they thought Keith Richards was. He just acquiesced to be the person they needed him to be in that moment, so they would get what they needed and he could move on. And it's a growth for all of us, right? That's a transactional interaction. I get it, right? It's an autograph or, oh my God, you were amazing at Woodstock or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, if you're going to fight that battle constantly just on principle you're going to have to see the whole me every time I present myself, you're going to lose more than you're going to win probably. And, maybe there's some broader learning for all of us in that. I'm still reconciling it myself, but I think that's the best way to kind of encapsulate it for me.
Is that different than compartmentalizing?
To me, slightly, yeah, that's a great question. I think to me, it's staging. I think you can stage elements of yourself, knowing that you are still your whole self.
Cool.
So,
like an onion, like you see like the third layer of the onion, but not a lot of people see the sixth layer kind of thing.
I'm also loving like immediate metaphors of stagecraft are happening in my brain. That makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you for that.
And then it's interesting because like our generation is like, be authentic. And also that's also nuanced as well. Like what type of authenticity, what do you feel comfortable with showing in certain contexts is super important to understand. Because you're right. You can't go ahead.
No. There's, to your point of layers, there's a metaphor in user-centered design of intimacy. And if the metaphor I love is sort of a house, right? If I see my partner on the porch with the UPS man, that makes sense. If I see my partner in the foyer with the UPS man, that might make some sense. If I see my partner upstairs with the UPS man, that's going to make a lot less sense. And realizing that those are layers of intimacy that we have expectations around, I think is the same for us as individuals. If I'm going to demand that you're going to see me buck naked on stage the second I show up, it's too much. I've got to stage it for you and let those layers of intimacy evolve as appropriate for that interaction.
Wow. I love that metaphor. And that totally makes sense, which gives us permission to not feel like the need to have it all together the first, interaction, or encourage people to build trust over time. Because I think with especially with social media and everything, you can just see these finished products where an author or an entrepreneur, they look so on stage buck naked, but actually they've been doing this for 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, and they have built up to that. So I think it's a really beautiful reminder. We met you because we went to a show at your place that you hosted for So Far Sounds, So Far Show, which if you're listening to this, you should check out So Far shows. They're really lovely. At-home concerts from local artists.
# not sponsored, just loved.
So, and what we were drawn drawn to was your environment that you created in your home, which is an old church. I'm curious your relationship to environments in general, just kind of on the macro, and how they've shaped you, or what you're curious. Have you been always curious about environments? Kind of take us along your journey with that kind of theme of environments.
Yeah, I have. I'm trying to think of how to unpack this. I would say one moment of realization during my kind of adventures was a thing called the Pattern Library, which is an architectural book, and it's a controversial book in architecture. If you're not a trained architect, you probably don't even know what it is, but it's actually incredibly helpful. And it comes back to that metaphor of the home, right? There are patterns for how you move people through a building, through a home or whatever, and those patterns are established, things that we as humans expect. And so that was sort of the first indication to me that there is sort of an unspoken interaction to a space that we have. You know, if the ceilings are 10 feet high versus 14 feet high, you're going to feel different in that space, and what you're going to do in that space matters. So for our space, you know, with 30-foot ceilings that are never going to change, that's it is what it is. And when we first walked into it, just sort of on a lark to say, you know, it'd be fun to go look at a church because we'd want to move there someday, and walked in and felt the kind of quietness and space, and didn't say anything, but looked at each other with a knowing that it was essentially, holy shit, this is the place. We got to figure this out. So spatially, yes. And then what you put in that space matters next. We're less about, family artifacts and things, and more about sort of storytelling artifacts and challenging those who come into our home to think. And so everything that we kind of collect or put up is somehow, again, it comes back to curiosity and challenging, and it's challenging ourselves, but it's also, if you're going to hang with us, it's going to challenge you too.
Cool. I'm struck by the notion of outfitting a home not for comfort or for memory, but for like cognitive, spiritual, whatever stimulation. That's super interesting. We don't have
family pictures. We have pictures of people from the late 1800s, mid 1800s. We have no idea who they are, but we've made up great stories about them, and that's a lot more interesting to us for whatever reason.
Totally, getting out of your own head and your own life is really lovely. You travel to another kind of dimension. It's fun.
Quickly, you said that when you walked into the space, there was, and I'm paraphrasing, but you did use the word knowing. There was a knowing. Can you briefly, let's dwell on that subject? What was that? What's the significance of that? How do you identify it? Why did you choose to run with it?
What did it feel like?
I mean, to be corny, it felt like home. When you're going to look at real estate, there's typically one, let's say it's a couple, there's one person who's thinking analytically about the space, and there's another person who doesn't think at all analytically and just walks in and says, nope, this is the wrong place, let's go. And the other person will say, well, wait a minute. And in this case, it was a mutual knowing instant. This is a deep, long story that we don't need to get into. But one of the aspects that I really love is that the church in its later days was a school for the deaf. And to me, it still holds that energy. It's a very, very quiet, dead quiet, not in a bad way, just dead quiet. And that peace
in the middle of Chicago.
Yeah, it's just a total stillness that I think you feel. And I think that's something that people react to whether or not they can articulate it.
Okay, so stillness, quiet. You've mentioned quiet a couple of times. We've also got the premise of challenge, in a sense, when you walk in. How do you relate to these things? Why? I mean, we've talked about challenge and growth and all that a little bit. Maybe quiet and stillness. What's the significance of that to you?
I would say, I've mentioned as an introvert, I recharge in stillness as opposed to those who would recharge in action. And right. And it's great. I respect both sides of it. I know, having finally understood myself in more recent years, that that's what I need. And I also think it's interesting that people can operate as extroverts, but actually operate in the world as extroverts, but actually heal and reprocess as introverts. And I think my partner in this case, Molly, is that as well. So I think the stillness really resonated with both of us.
Mm-hmm. How cool! I feel that we've got our own parallel with that here, Faye and me. Backing up to something else that I was curious about, and I forget what the context was of what this was earlier. Stakes and risk. You do a lot of different things. You've tried a lot of different things. Different people have different risk profiles. One person finds risky, another person will not. What is risky? Like, how do I put this? What do you personally find risky, independent of standard definitions of risk? And when have you tackled something that felt genuinely risky? Like there were stakes that actually mattered to you as a specific individual?
That's a great question. There are 100 ways to go with that. I would like to consider two. One is, and I share this exploration with my business partner, Scott Miller, who's kind of co-created this exploration of what is craft or craftsmanship. And a core tenet of that to us is the difference between strength and courage. And for us, the definition of strength is having the capacity to continue or move when you have no choice. So let's say fighting stage 4 cancer, which Scott did. The opposite of that would be courage, which sounds counterintuitive on the surface, but courage is the ability to move forward when you have total freedom of choice. So when you could not make the hard decision, when the quiet voice inside of you is saying, do it, but your head is saying, no fucking way. Like that's courage, right? The courage is to say, I'm going to leave a loveless marriage. Courage is, I'm going to help this person who's getting berated on the L. You have 100 other choices you could make, which include not making a choice. That to me is profound. So that's a big part of that gap analysis is whether you're dealing with a strength issue or a courage issue. Both are important. But for in using Scott's situation, you can't say that those who didn't win their quote unquote battle with cancer lost or are less than those who won. They just didn't win. And they expressed all of the strength they possibly could in incomprehensible amounts of courage, but they didn't win. So that there's no way to judge that. So I think it's important to understand that dichotomy and where you are in that. And then lastly, the second thing I would just say is the gap between where you are and where you're going to be is the measure of the strength or courage you're going to have to exhibit, right? If I'm going to get from stage 4 to stage 0 cancer, that's an MF of a gap. If I'm going to get from owning a company with 150 employees to having none of that and leave my marriage and start a motorcycle commission and walk out of my house and not know where I'm going to go next, there's the motorcycle guy that I partnered with on that example said at one point, the greatest thing that can happen to, in his words, a man is to lose everything at the peak of his game. I kind of agree. I think there's at some point you got to lose everything and have to figure it out. And some people so cool. You look at examples like Seinfeld or other situations where you leave at the peak and rebuild like that. Somehow, some way that should happen. So anyway, those are gigantic gaps, but people hopping tiny gaps, I respect that too. That's okay. It's just what is our, that's an adrenaline issue. There are people jumping out of planes. I'm not going to do that. I'll go rollerblading or something, but, so anyway, I don't think there's any benefit in judging any of that. I think it's just a matter of awareness.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did I hear correctly that this is part of some of the ideas that you just laid out, you and your business partner are using professionally also? You have a practice of some sort around this?
I would call it a framework. We would, you know, there are aspirations to have a book, and as we've written that 3, 4, 5 times, it's actually it continuously boils down to a pamphlet, and it's basically a framework. It's saying there. If you look at the world through kind of apprentice, journeyman, craftsman, master craftsman, that kind of escalation has common criteria, and then it spirals up. Like, so once you get to mastery, you go back to apprentice in some other way, because you need to keep moving. If you just sit right there at that one spot, then fine for you, that's where you are. But if you're going to continue, maybe it gets back to the beginning of this conversation, if you're going to continue to push yourself as a well-rounded human being and vibrant in the world, you got to keep pushing through. Another thing that Scott will say is familiarity is a false friend. At some point, familiarity is okay. You can rest there for a moment, but it's also will eat you alive. It will make you lose who you are and stop growing.
So how does that relate to kind of the personal journey of growth? Like, familiarity is needed for, I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just curious how that plays into like feeling safe. Because there's a level of safety where it's like needed, like just a human primal thing in order to be safe. And then there's a like not safety where you can grow, right? So how does familiarity play into that kind of need for safety?
I think I would look at it maybe as a metaphor of, again, sort of a home base. Like, it's, of course, you're going to have a home that is familiar and safe and lets you recharge. But if you're going to stay in that home perpetually, you're never going to grow, right? You got to go outside. And that's where, again, I would have a million times respect for the introvert / homebound person who just going out the door is terrifying. That means something. We should respect and celebrate that. But for those who need to go out the door and jump out of a plane or race a motorcycle or whatever else, that's respectable too. So it's a matter of how you're wired and your own appetite and how you were brought up and all that other stuff.
So you mentioned the example of leaving a marriage and selling a business and exploring motorcycles. Was that your personal example? So
in a nutshell, yeah.
So what was the feeling of being courageous? Like, was it shitty? Was it hard? Was it good? Was it adrenaline filled? Like, what did it feel like being courageous in those leavings, in those exits to start something new?
I would say, and I think I am not alone in this, there are plenty of people who have a similar situation where you get into a relationship and or a marriage and you know immediately it is not right. But it's too disruptive or chaotic to get out of it. And it's better to try to take care of that person or make them feel okay and put yourself aside to keep the status quo or to do good for somebody else or to make it, do it for the children and that kind of stuff. But the truth is you're ignoring yourself, which is the tragedy of too many lives. And ignoring yourself, and more importantly, ignoring your truth is not to be hyperbolic, but it's an abomination. So it's if you are going to ignore your truth, that is the worst thing you can do. Now, when you start to live your truth, act on your truth, the truth that you know is inside of you and the person you need to be, and that's not comfortable or acceptable to those people around you at that time, too bad. They need to reorganize around your truth. And if that happens, and if people do organize, you stand for your truth, stand in your truth, and stand for your truth, and the world reorganizes around you and your truth, your life will be better. So if somebody looked at it from the outside and said, he left his wife, he left his company, he started a motorcycle, you could look at me and say, that was very self-indulgent. Sure, judge me for that. But the truth is, I needed to be who I needed to be, and I hadn't been that person for 18 years, probably my entire life.
Hmm.
So, and I can tell you the joy on the other side of it is pretty good.
That makes me really happy. What
very strong feelings right now, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you said the world reorganizes around you. Was that something you expected ahead of time, or was that something you learned like post hoc? Because that's an important detail.
I think I knew it. I think to my parents' credit and the environment I was in, I think I always knew that. I think, people like Khalil Gibran and other sort of true prophets have always been in my head and heart. And so I knew things, and those are, those aspects of truth knowing are big in Khalil and some others of that ilk. So it's one thing to know it intellectually. It's another thing to walk through the door and say, no, I am doing this. So I think that's the difference.
I have two kind of questions surrounding that. Totally, the courage. What was it like? 20 years ago, 15 years ago, did you think that you would be a person who would like sell their business and start new?
I mean, I wouldn't have thought I'd have a business that was anywhere near what it was. And so the irony is you can exhibiting strength, and this is important for Scott and I in particular. You can live your not truth through strength and muscle your way through that over and over and over again, which is truly at the end of the day, living in your head and justifying and rationalizing and pushing and fighting. And you can be incredibly successful, but there is another way. And that is you can listen to that voice inside and say, I'm going to stand for whatever my truth is. And I can tell you it's effortless. And so the question is, do you want to fight hard all day long, 24 hours a day to continue to have what you've got? Or do you want to acquiesce to your truth and let it flow? That to me I'm not saying it's easy. It's terrifying, but it's better.
Totally. And you spoke about the flow, or, it's easier. And there's a lot of joy on the other side of that. What has specifically been kind of moments or aha moments of joy on the other side of that journey so far for you?
I think I would characterize it as synchronicity. I think once you get into that flow and you start paying attention, and there are corny new age examples of this that I think are inappropriate, but I love. Yeah. But it's real, the secret is cornball, but there's some real there too. So the synchronicity I would describe would include, walking into this church. Like there's no way on earth that was going to happen, and it did. And there was no way on earth we were going to be able to finance this, and we figured it out through this weird series of circumstances. And I would go all the way back to, I can tell you this, if you'll allow me to sound crazy for a second. I've only told this to Molly and Scott. I was sitting on a couch in my home and said, why can't I have this in a woman, in a partner? Why can't I have this in a business partner? Why can't I have this in my life? Why can't I? And I swear to God, I had no idea at the time, but it turned out I was manifesting at that time. And within weeks, and this was within days of being able to walk because I had broken my pelvis and had sat still for 10 weeks. Within weeks, Scott showed up, Molly showed up, my entire life changed. And I knew from the second both of those people walked in my door that they were my guardian angels at that point, and they were going to help me get through the transition.
That's amazing. And Isaac's crying.
This had all of this so strongly.
I mean, yeah, this is our life, and we talk about this with our friends and all the things that we're doing. So it's not woo woo; it is you, as we like to say. We just came up with that.
That happened this weekend.
That happened this weekend at a retreat. But before I met Isaac, I wrote down my ex's qualities that were really toxic, and then qualities in my partner that I wanted, like literally side by side. And within like 3 months, there comes Isaac, rest is history. But there have been so many synchronicities that once we're aware of it and aligned with that truth or with our truth. I mean, like, and I've not just seen it in our life. I know a lot of people who live like that. And it's just like, you can't deny there's a common thread of experience that it's just like, well, we can either fight against it and in your analogy, like fight against what is true and be miserable, or we can just allow it to be and have it be amazing. So I find that all really beautiful and really and connect. So I think I talked to you a little bit about Jenny from Jenny's Ice Cream. I don't know if I did, but she uses creativity in her work so much. And she talks on Instagram a lot about like, she's like, the way we're doing it is so boring. We are such creative beings. Let's bring creativity, like vast, wild, woo-woo creativity to business and watch the world change because of it. And that's what excites us. We're just like so excited about doing big things or important things, or even small things that have big impact or whatever, living in our truth in ways that are magical and creative and not by the book. But like, honestly, times are changing. We're not in 1920 anymore. We're not in 1975. In 1975 or in the 60s, women couldn't sign a credit card without their husband. Like, we are just in a different time. And I think we're waking up to what's possible because we're opening parts of our brain and our heart and our awareness in ways that we've never had in human history, which is cool. Some have in the past, but they were considered the woo-woo philosophers. And now we have a lot of like everyday philosophers walking around today that, you know, would really love to have a one-on-one conversation with those people. But anyways, just random thoughts. Isaac, your turn.
Wow, I'm grateful for the reprieve in that because I don't think I could have spoken for a minute. I feel all this really strongly because that's how I feel. No, that I'm speaking too broadly. Let me take it from this angle. So one of the reasons, Jim, why I was excited to speak with you is because I saw, through the lens of my own experience and not knowing the totality of yours, I saw some resonance in what you were choosing to do with your presence in the world and what we're choosing to do with ours, particularly with Lightword, but also generally. So I'm curious, because I've got my own story and I could tell it, but I want to know about yours because that's the premise of this podcast. What is your experience in trusting the flow of your truth? I'm adding lots of words. Please tell me if any of them don't fit. What's your experience with trusting the flow of your own truth professionally, vocationally, in a general work sphere that is the West of business as strength? Like it's got to be a struggle fest all the time. Tell me about your relationship to all of that, if you would.
I think the best way I could encapsulate that in business is that it is a matter of telling the truth. In that case, it's a version of truth to power because power sits with the person paying the bill to a certain degree.
Okay.
Speaking truth to power means that you're going to tell them the way it is, even if they don't want to hear it. We'll be kind about it. We say this all the time. We'll be kind, but we're going to tell you the truth, even when you don't like it. And if you don't like it to a degree that you don't want to be around us, that's okay too. That just means that we're better suited elsewhere. So
the world reorganizes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So and that opens doors that it wouldn't have otherwise have opened. And so you get other clients that you wouldn't have seen otherwise, and so on and so on. So I think that's the core of it. I think that is a willingness to tell the truth to whomever you're working with. If that's a bad coworker, be kind, but tell them the truth. If that's a bad client, be kind, but tell them the truth, and it'll work itself out sooner than later. But it does come back to your truth can't be just roaring out at everybody all 24/7 with a floodlight. It's got to be, again, kind of staged, engaged to the situation.
Going kind of a little bit back to the joy that you're in right now, post the courageous actions that you've taken in your life. Not that you're done with those, but post that moment of courage, yes. Post that moment. Are there things that you're looking forward to kind of conceptually or just kind of in a meta way? Are you looking forward to exploring new kind of mediums of creativity or What are you curious about right now? You talked a little bit about the motorcycle thing out east. Are there any other things kind of brewing up inside of you that you're excited about?
I'm not pandering here. I'm excited about having conversations like this. I'm excited about scaling. I'm excited about finding ways to, and again, I'm borrowing Scott's words, touch as many people as we can with the goodness we have and the time we have left. Because you never know how much time you've got left. And so it's really a big part of scaling this goodness right now. And I know that scaling the goodness isn't through establishing a C Corp or an LLC and, getting an HR department spun up and having 3,000 employees and yada, yada. It's, we can do this with 10, 12, 15 people. We can do this with conversations like this through platforms like you have thankfully built. And that I think that's what's most intriguing to me right now. And as I've said to you guys, I think I am stunned at the authenticity and total lack of any sort of pretense that you have around having these kinds of conversations. It's really, truly inspiring because it took me freaking 40 years to get there. So
thank you. Truly. And why are these conversations important, you think?
I think well, Molly and I were on a 2-week motorcycle trip a few months ago, and we heard this guy who played this like new agey music at this hotel, and then pontificated for 2 hours about these new agey things, and just wanted to throw up for the entire time. And it's one of those, it's like an earworm where you can't stop listening. And he's like, oh yeah, the truth is all about synchronicity and brr, brr, brr. And it's just so monumentally annoying. But what I think is incredible is true good conversations with meat on them, like this, I think, which isn't just pontificating for that sake, but having real conversations about real stuff that matters. And I think that's how we need to find authentic ways to connect with people. And I think this and other methods are by far the best way to scale.
Scale. Yeah. Abe and I have an interesting relationship with scale. He's naturally, I think he naturally sees the purpose in that much more quickly than I do, which is probably tied to the, like what I briefly mentioned earlier of like, I was so anxious about truly landing in my own identity. And I had to become very solid in that before the concept of scale would be anything besides offensive.
Makes sense.
That's a whole thing. Conversation. I'm reassembling my train of thought because there are several of them right now on the same tracks. Conversations, authenticity. Yeah. So we've done, this might be episode 52. Actually, we've done a bunch of these conversations, and like the trick of this, or the game of this for me, Abe might describe it differently, is to get to a place where all three of us are evolving and developing thought together. It's not just rehashing things that we already know. I might be rephrasing what you just said about like
the cycle,
pontificating ad nauseum and adding nothing new.
No.
I'm adding some of my own language here. But to get to a place with often the stranger, but really with anyone, where we are all exploring together, feels like the point. And I know that I personally am very served by that kind of thing, when we can all like look each other in the eye from a couple thousand miles away and settle on, okay, cool, let's see if we can parse this out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it, and I think the part of the reason that I was so offended by that interaction I was describing is because there was no chance on earth that any of those people in that conversation were going to have a genuine spark of interest about the person they were talking to. All they wanted to do was hear themselves talk. And if anybody had said, what is it about you and your experience that has made this meaningful to you? Tell me about you. Let me see you. That would have made it, then you'd be like, whoa, wait a minute, this is getting interesting. Where's that going? And it's the journey inside, as we'll say, that matters. That they were having journeys out. They were going to try to, it's like Evel Knievel jumping school buses. Like, look what I can do. Look at the turn of phrase I can make. And it's not about that. It's about getting vulnerable and getting inside yourself or inside somebody else.
Totally. And I think like, it's funny that you say that, because I've been feeling a little bit kind of like, as much I've loved this podcast, and in other parts of my work, it has seemed internally that I've been like just hearing my own voice talk about the things that I know, which I've gotten so burnt out over, like, and it's only been a year of it. And I'm glad I had kind of a balance of learning from other people, because I get like, I know a lot internally. I'm emotionally intelligent. And also I get bored with that because I want to keep on expanding on the kind of leading edge of my own thought. And I'm really excited to see like, and to kind of continue to build connections with folks like you and other folks. And it kind of seems like this is a new agey kind of woo-woo thing. Like we're all we're in the same cluster of souls that decided to be on this earth, but we're all doing our different thing. And it's like nice to find them again on earth. Like, okay, I know you're over there. I feel less alone, which is great. And then like, oh, what are you seeing over there? Cool. Like, how can this kind of lead me in my own path?
Yeah. We're at an inflection point societally, which is, I think those of us who are here need to figure out how to reconcile, because there are so many people who are terrified of the reality of anybody being able to self-actualize appropriately. So no matter where you come from or who you are, or what color you are. And we've got to figure out how to get through that right now. I think that's the existential moment we're in, and whatever it is to lead or provide an example, or I think it's going to involve a fight in one way or another to get through that, to get on the right side of that. We're right there.
Yeah.
There's what I would like to do is produce a theory and then offer it for discussion, but I don't know what the theory is yet. So I'm just going to observe that there's an interesting contrast here between like exploration and curiosity and courage and movement and change, if I can generalize all of that. And you used the word acquiescence earlier when describing one's truth, like acquiesce to your truth, allow it to flow. And I sense a lot of peace available in the idea that even my identity is my own, and I may stage it for you in some way, but if I'm not anxiously trying to communicate all of it all the time, then that implies an internal kind of anchored restedness where I hold myself and that is enough. And so I'm curious about holding the hunger. That's adding too much meaning. I'm curious about holding the change and the flux and the growth alongside the peace and the solitude and the tranquility and all of that. Can you talk to me about how, I mean, firstly, do you resonate with, identify with, experience those two things simultaneously at all? Does that make sense? I guess let's start there. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah. And I think two things can be true at once, which is okay. I think my reaction to what you're describing right there is that even when you're at peace, work is still necessary. So when you, for instance, describe a former partner and the toxic elements that they brought to your life and the positive elements that would be better in your life, that's work. You've got to do that. You've got to be willing to have that conversation with yourself and put those things into existence, as call them intentions, in order for things to start to move. So even when you're at peace, I think there's still, and I struggle with this, there's still some work to be done about, well, what's next? It's nice to be peaceful, but where's the next challenge? And what's going to be a meaningful challenge?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And even biologically, when we are resting, our bodies are still moving forward and they're still, pumping out the blood. Like we never stop. And I think like even when we're sleeping, we never stop. It takes work in that solitude, in that peaceful state to recharge. I mean, it's so beautiful. Like on my health journey, I've just learned so much about the body. And I mean, like the fact that like typically on average, like you need like 1,800 to 2,100 calories if you just sat down and did nothing all day to have the body function properly. Like that's wild. Like, so nothing is ever like actually still or paused, which is really fascinating to actually think about. It's kind of a mind fuck. One last like kind of mini question before we get into our last two questions. What is your relationship to patience? You said you wanted to scale this work. You've been on this journey for a long time. I think a lot of people, myself included, have had struggled with patience in the past. Like, what is your relationship to patience on your journey?
I think the strongest reaction I have to patience is related to observing in others either an unwillingness or inability to address their own capacity and become as great as they can be. And I will get vigorously impatient about that, to the point that I need to disengage like it. And I've learned more recently that I've just got to stop, because maybe you can see things in others that they can't see in themselves, and they're not going to see it until they see it. So Scott is a great example that he'll often quote, that somebody asked a coach of his one time, well, how do you motivate people? And the answer is you can't motivate anybody. All you can do is wait for them to find their own motivation. You can open doors for them to find that motivation, but you cannot motivate them. So anyway, patience for me usually gets tangled up there. I'm infinitely patient, I think, with myself, which maybe isn't a great, but if I'm at peace, I'm not fighting with myself. I'm just going to be patiently there. And it also patience to wait for things to come through. We're in a moment professionally where we're waiting for a few weeks now for the next thing to happen. And we know how it's going to play out, but we don't know, we can't know the inner workings of what is happening. So anyway.
Totally. I love that you can, try to motivate people, but it doesn't land until it lands internally. You can create an environment, all that stuff. Everyone told me, oh, you should lose weight or like whatever. And I'm like, first I find that kind of insulting and also threatening. So I'm not going to motivate myself until I was ready to lose weight. Then I started. And I'm about to go on kind of a couple month, not hiatus, but just kind of internal exploration time. And so your kind of thoughts about patience is encouraging, because 3 months out of my whole life is not that much, or a month or two. But as a performer, as someone who likes to create, it's a practice to be kind of like, okay, it's not taking away anything from what I've created or what I'm going to create. It's actually a really important part of the process. So I'm really excited about that. So we are wrapping up on time. Unfortunately, you are the most interesting man alive. We could talk for hours. We have talked for hours. Penultimate question. What does an empowered Jim look like and feel like?
This? I mean, I feel like I'm okay there. Like I have achieved that. An empowered Jim has freedom of choice, which is a rare moment, and I could certainly argue that some of that is built on privilege, and I'm aware of that. But an empowered me is doing what I'm doing right now. I don't mean to be trite, but that's
amazing.
And an Uber driver asked me, so what are you working on? What's your big goals? And I'm like, how about nothing? I have none. I'm good. I'm here. I made it, and that's hard also for some. I'm not saying I'm lazy and I'm plateaued and I'm done. I'm just saying.
Oh, clearly not.
It's okay.
Totally.
No, it's enough.
That's interesting that you say that, because I'm at a point right now where there aren't too many like extreme goals, because I've kind of achieved a lot of them. So I'm like, okay, in the whole curiosity thing, line or journey, like what's next? I'm curious. Like I'm waiting to see what wants to come up versus arbitrarily making one up for nothing.
That's
So that's cool. I love
itself.
that.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that.
Lastly, what do you know for sure?
I know for sure that if I live my truth, the world will reorganize itself around me. And that, to me, I don't mean to be repeating myself, but that is the only thing I know, rock solid, no hesitation. Nobody can argue me off at that point.
Well, drop the mic there.
Thank you for your time, Jim. I value
Pleasure.
this conversation exchange very much. I wish you all the best.
Likewise.
Jim, so glad we're friends now. So glad we went into a stranger's house 2 years ago for a show, and I talked to you briefly. For those of you who are listening, Jim has an amazing underground restaurant in Chicago it's like a private restaurant event space. Check it out and check out all of his work. Jim, thank you so much. We appreciate you. We'll see you soon. Have a good one.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
This podcast is the work of Lightward, our company, named for that toward the light direction which informs every single thing that we do, including money, which means, like everything else, the way we earn revenue is not based on industry norms. It's based on what feels deeply right and aligned by passing through the door that feels like it has more behind it, not less. And the way we keep this podcast going is all Lightward. It's pay what feels good. It's an exchange of value between you and us. We're keeping conventional podcast advertising totally out of this. And here's how Pay What Feels Good works. We give you this episode because it feels good to do so. And you consider, honestly, what number of dollars this episode is genuinely worth to you. I do not care if that's $3, $1,000, or literally $0 and a heart emoji, as long as that trade genuinely makes your day better. And the energy there is the entire point. That is what we're building our business on. No advertisers, no selling your attention, just you and us, trading value in a way that builds us both up. So whatever the number, when you're done listening, head to empoweredhumanacademy.com and hit the Pay What Feels Good button. We use this policy across all of our company's work, and I'm really excited to bring it here to the world of podcasts. This is us voting for the world that we want to see. Thank you for being here.